You're probably looking at the title of this video thinking this is just going to be another video that's going to trash on the show and say it's utter garbage. But that's not how this video is going to go. I'm just going to talk about things I thought the show could do better and also things I thought the show did really well. I like a lot of what the show has done so far, but I think it should be okay to critique things you like without it being seen as hate. I'm not one of those people that gets upset when the adaptation is not a one-to-one to the books. I know that's an impossible thing to expect, but I will reference a book here and there, because it is hard not to reference the source material when you're talking about an adaptation. I will make a full retrospective video on all my thoughts about the entire series when all the episodes are out. Pacing is probably the biggest gripe I have with this show. The story feels very rushed in places. Yes, the book goes through a lot too, but the show does not give us the adequate time needed for the audience to feel well engaged in the story. It feels like the show has a checklist of things it wants to happen, but doesn't give us the proper screen time to build any of the tension that is needed for these scenes to be memorable. Let's take for example the Mrs. Dodds scene. I'm not expecting a 10-minute drawn out fight, but in that scene, Percy fumbles the cap of his pen and the Fury dies. That all happens in like 5 seconds. He doesn't even move his sword. Even if the fight is not drawn out, there is zero build-up either. After Percy pushes Nancy into the fountain, Mrs. Dodds instantly turns into a Fury after and dies, all within 20 seconds. In both the book and the movie, he gets lured away from the main group, which is a nice build-up and a source of great tension. As Percy is lured further and further into the museum, the audience slowly becomes more and more unsettled. We don't know exactly what is going to happen, but something feels off. Then the attack begins. After the fight is over in both the movie and the book, he regroups with everyone instantly, so the effect of being gaslighted immediately hits harder because he's the only one to actually see the Fury. This is the first scene introducing us to the monsters and dangers Percy is going to face. It should be really impactful. However, the show doesn't allow for that kind of nuance or any kind of pressure to be built up like that, with how quickly it feels like it needs to run through each scene and plot point. Another example is the Medusa episode. The core focus of episode 3 is about Medusa, and the episode spends a large chunk fleshing out the character and giving a chance for the audience to learn about her backstory, which I think is great. Giving Medusa more depth than just being a monster and making the gods seem morally gray is a great addition. Her relating her story with Percy's mom and Annabeth allows us to see her story from a different angle. However, all of that is immediately thrown out the window when she does a 180 literally 30 seconds later, offering to kill Annabeth and Grover. Such an abrupt shift in the character is jarring and immediately nullifies all the character development she had in the last 20 minutes. What is the point of spending that long on her character if the show is going to invalidate it seconds later? Next, when the demigods realize they have to actually fight her, that encounter barely lasts a minute, and the actual fighting part is even shorter. Annabeth puts a hat on her, Percy swings his sword, and she is dead. That fight barely lasts 5 seconds. They could have had her chase them through the maze of statues while the trio splits up, but no, she dies nearly instantly. When monsters die that easily, there is no tension. You don't worry for the characters because it seems pretty easy. The stakes don't seem that high if iconic monsters like Medusa are defeated swiftly with almost no struggle. Then right after, Percy one-shots the Fury waiting outside again. That's twice the Furies have been one-shot very easily. With everything dying this easily, it really weakens the idea that the trio is in much danger. I will give credit where credit is due though. That Minotaur fight was really impactful and made you truly feel like Percy was in actual danger. This is because they allowed the fight to last longer than 10 seconds. Simply by making the Medusa fight sequence last like 3 minutes, nothing insane in terms of length, it would have made her feel so much more like a threat. But you might say that there are only 8 episodes. They don't have the time to make fight sequences longer because they have a lot to cover. And yeah, that's where my next point comes in. Episode length. For being an 8-episode series, the length of each episode is way too short. When you have this much content to cover, there is no reason that each episode is not an hour long. The extra 15 to 20 minutes an episode would have really allowed the story to take things slower and add some seriously needed nuance to the storytelling. Then they wouldn't feel the need to rush a scene so they can fit in the next plot point. The longer episodes would also give the audience a chance to connect with the characters, as we would get to see a larger look into who they are. Episode 4 was barely 28 minutes when you take out the recap and credit scenes, and with having episodes of that length, you either gotta cut out large chunks of the book or run through numerous plot points and not give them the time that they deserve. It's not like they didn't have more money for these scenes either. Each episode had a reported budget of $12 to $15 million. There is definitely some CGI and stuff, but it is not that extensive for the budget to be this high, while having the episodes this short. Especially when you compare this show to another limited series like The Last of Us, that show had a budget of $10 to $15 million per episode as well. There was a lot more extensive CGI, complex sets, and explosions in that show, while each episode was also an hour long. It's not like the budget is going into getting an extensively popular cast as well either. No one in the main cast is extremely well known to the likes of Pedro Pascal either, other than maybe Lin-Manuel Miranda, but even then, Lin-Manuel does not have an extensive screen time in each episode like Pedro did. I feel like the show having a budget this high was really squandered, as having the ability to have longer episodes would have truly solved a lot of the issues with pacing and would have allowed for the creation of more believable relationships. I love the content being shown, but the episodes often feel too rushed or too short. Having longer episodes would have easily solve that problem. Let me just start off by saying that these kids seem like they are pretty charismatic in the things that I've seen them outside of this show. Like Walker was great in the Adam Project, and Leah and Grover are pretty likable in their interviews. I don't know if it's the directing or their lines being so bad, but so often it feels like they're reading directly off the script in some of these scenes.
Don't kid yourself. I wasn't that frightened.
Like, these kids are not bad at acting if you look at some of the promos they filmed, but they can only do so much with what they are given. Like Walker in the Adam Project literally plays a quippy kid who is so much like the Percy Jackson character. But the writing and directing somehow make Walker seem awkward in many of the quips he gives. You realistically cannot expect a child actor to improv in better lines. When he sees his mom get vaporized into dust right in front of him, he really doesn't react a whole lot. He's kind of just like, meh? Again, I don't really fault any of the actors for this. I have seen Walker do so much better in other projects. The actors can only do so much with the direction they are given. But the main trio lack any real chemistry, and therefore a lot of their conversations feel flat. Show don't tell is one of the fundamentals of visual media, and this show consistently does the opposite. Just take the scenes where Percy first arrives at camp and Luke is telling him about Annabeth. He tells us Annabeth is like my sister, Annabeth is a great fighter, Annabeth is always multiple steps ahead of everyone. Why not actually show a couple of scenes of Annabeth and Luke's bond, or of Annabeth having a sword battle, instead of just telling us? What is the point of adapting a book to a visual media if the characters constantly have to explain things to the viewer instead of actually showing us? This tell don't show method the writers are using also affect how the characters interact with each other as well. Basically, all of the scenes where Grover and Percy talk have been a way for the writers to use Grover as a vehicle to dump a bunch of exposition on the viewer. This makes it so that there's barely any scenes of Grover and Percy having banter, or even having friendly convos despite them being best friends. Again, I felt like this method of tell don't show was used because the writers felt they didn't have enough time to show us using scenes. Again, this could have been solved if the episodes were simply an hour long. When I say Disneyification, I don't mean it in a way where people call the show too woke or something like that. I think that people calling this show too woke are cringe. I mean in the sense where Disney feels the need to constantly dump things down for the viewers, and their constant need to include comic relief scenes, to the point where serious scenes are undercut by poor humor. Take for example the Mr. D scene. He's supposed to be feared by the satyrs like Grover, but the entire time, Grover talks back to him with no fear, and Mr. D is largely played off as a comedy relief character. The Olympian gods are shown as morally grey numerous times throughout the show, with Athena and Poseidon being responsible for Medusa, and then Athena letting her own child get attacked in the arch for Annabeth's prior perceived disrespect. But then suddenly Mr. D is shown as this funny and chill dude you can disrespect, so which one is it? You can't have it both ways. Another scene where the humor undercuts the tone of the scene is when Sally starts becoming a matador for the Minotaur. Yes, the scene is goofy and funny, but why would you add a funny scene when Sally is in the process of sacrificing herself for Percy? It really takes you out of the scene and loses any of the built-up tension. Disneyification also occurs when Disney is constantly afraid that a scene might be too much for a kid to see, like for example, the Medusa scene. They make her invisible because they fear cutting off her head might be too graphic for the kids, and the audience never gets to see the severed head. Look, I get it, the show is PG, and the target audience is 10 to 12, and I am clearly not 11. But if cutting off Medusa's head was fine to show in the movie, which is also rated PG, why is it suddenly too much to show now? Disney's constant need to play it safe throughout the show really dulls down the action and frankly just makes it less entertaining. I've seen many people use Rick's heavy involvement with the show and writing as a way to silence any and all criticism. However, I think this way of thinking is flawed. Don't get me wrong, I'd rather have Rick involved than not, but his involvement alone does not make the show perfect. Rick is undoubtedly an incredible author, but that doesn't mean he would be an amazing screenwriter. There has already been an example of a YA author struggling to make the jump as a screenwriter in J.K. Rowling and her missteps with the Fantastic Beasts series. With Rick being the writer of the first 2 episodes, I think this is the main reason why those 2 episodes have so much exposition dumping of where characters tell, don't show, as often tell, don't show works well in books, but fails when it's done in visual media. I think the lackluster score plays a big part in everything feeling kind of underwhelming. In any show, the soundtrack plays a major role in building up tension and making the overall show feel more memorable. I feel the show is lacking in this department and is a major disappointment. Every iconic show or movie has a tune where within seconds of playing it, you know exactly where it's from. Like as soon as this plays, you know that's Harry Potter. However, this show has nothing like that. I ask you to pause right now and just think of a single tune from the show without looking it up. Can you even remember a single one? The chances are probably low because I'll tell you I can't remember a single one. Without comparing this TV series to the movies and just looking at it as an independent series, do you not see some of the flaws I'm talking about? When presented with critiques, I see many people say, but it's better than the movies though. Of which I totally agree, it's better than the movies, but being better than the movies is a ridiculously low bar. Even I originally fell victim to this thinking as well. I even made a video talking about how much better it is than the movies. But the more I think about it, if this series is gonna have any staying power so that all 3 book series are adapted, I think some improvements have to be made, cause as of right now, I feel like the Percy Jackson name is doing a bit of heavy lifting. This video has been a lot of critiques and criticisms, and I just wanted to end on an aspect that I really liked. I loved the way the camp was displayed in this show. It was exactly how I imagined it. That is why I wanted to so desperately see more of it in the episodes. I also think episode 4 has been much better in terms of the pacing issues I touched on earlier. The trio was actually allowed to figure out it was Echidna using clues like the broken glass instead of figuring it out instantly like they did with Medusa. It also didn't feel nearly as rushed as the earlier episodes. Also, the chase to the climax at the top of the arch was great and an amazing way to build stakes and tension. The only thing I wish episode 4 would have done was be longer. The show has so much to cover and an episode cannot be 28 minutes when there are only 8 episodes total in the entire season. But even then, episode 4 was probably my favorite episode so far. Either way, what is your take on what I've said so far? I would love to hear what the broader fandom thinks about what I've said.